How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk. You might not know this, but before I record an episode, I like to break a sweat. And I do that using the Chop Fit. Over the course of the past year, the Chop Fit has allowed me to lose weight, tone up my body, and feel even more amazing about myself. A feeling that you should all feel about yourselves as well. If you use this code, SpearChop10, you get $10 off your order. Once again, use code SpearChop10 for $10 off your Chop Fit order. It'll change your life. Thank you. How's it going, everyone? John here, the host of Spear Talk, and today we got two wonderful guests. Most of you should recognize Josh. Josh, who I served in the government with, lover of all things cryptozoology, werewolves, skinwalkers, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster. Glad to have you back here, Josh. And today we're welcoming our really special guest, Lyle Blackburn. Lyle is an author, producer, singer of the band Ghoultown. He's been on every single TV show, and the author of some incredible books to include the Boggy Creek Casebook and Sinister Swamps, which are the only two I've had, but the other one's actually been on back order on Amazon. So you can grab all his stuff on Amazon. And but Lyle, it's great to be out here today with you.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
So the reason why I wanted you on here, obviously Josh and I have this love of all things Bigfoot, werewolves, and all that. But
anything with hair.
Anything with hair. But for you, before we kind of jump into your career and some of the work you've done, and some of the research is amazing. How did you kind of, as a child, was there any catalyst or stuff that kind of led you down this path? Like, how did you kind of become like this? I would consider you a staple now in this genre and horror in general itself.
Well, I mean, it was just something that I was born with, I guess. As far back as I can remember, I loved horror movies and, anything on TV that had vampires and werewolves or ghosts. I just loved that stuff. And sometime in elementary school, they passed around this little thing where you could order scholastic books. And I got one called Strange But True. And it had stories of Bigfoot, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, and other just weird stuff, and I was like, whoa, this is really cool, because this is like monsters that could exist, and they, those type things were, far away from where I lived in Texas. It's like I wasn't going to convince my parents to take me to Scotland or anything like that. So then I, by some miracle, my parents took me to a drive-in and we saw the movie The Legend of Boggy Creek back in the 70s sometime when I was really little. And that really did it for me, because it dramatized sightings of a Sasquatch-like creature in southern Arkansas, only about 3 hours from where I lived in North Texas. And so that right there just kind of put together the scary, the horror, the cryptids, real life monsters. And I've just been fascinated ever since. It was later that I just sort of got into this more seriously and professionally, but it's just been something I've been a lifelong fan.
Now, going through school though, were you always big into the notes, the research? Because the work you've done specifically for the Boggy Creek stuff with the case studies and working with these other groups to research and interviews, did this type of passion you had for this stuff help you actually in life through school and stuff like that when it came to research and reading and all that too?
Well, I never really thought of it in terms of I could do any kind of research. When I was younger, I just liked the subject and just would read books or, whatever. And I never thought even a clue that maybe I could actually go and research. But the thing that did help me is I was always good at writing and in music, and I've kind of been a professional musician / writer in some form or another my whole life. So the writing part really helped when I came to the point of, well, I want to research these things. I want to write a book about what was true about the legend of Boggy Creek, which is kind of where I started in the research phase. And then, having done professional writing, then those skills came in to kind of catapult me into documenting and researching.
Yeah, John, we were talking a little bit about that in the pre-show of kind of what differentiates you and some of the other people working in the field. It's just you kind of focus on what I consider more interesting, which is a lot of those local monsters, like that local folklore, and some of that touches on, you know, national stuff like Bigfoot, things you could find anywhere in the woods. But the level of research you've done with local cases, as far as old newspaper articles, eyewitness stuff, the interviews you did for Boggy Creek, they're really interesting. What kind of led you to focus on the more local stuff, considering that, as you said earlier, you were kind of into anything paranormal and cryptid early on with movies and whatnot, like we all were.
I think, you know, and kind of launched from the Boggy Creek thing, where the creature was essentially a Bigfoot. I mean, it's described as 7 foot tall, covered in hair, it walked upright on 2 legs. But because it had a movie and it was called the Boggy Creek Monster, it seemed to have more personality than just sort of generic Bigfoot. And after I researched that case, I just really appreciated how the local flavor played into the story and even the sightings of that creature. So when I went forward working on other books and things, I kind of continued in that format where I would talk about the place where it was cited and look for cases that had a bunch of newspaper coverage and maybe had a name, you know, the Lizard Man or the Sabine Thing or whatever the name was. It just seemed to be more cool and almost creepy and scary and regionalized than just sort of tackling Bigfoot as a whole.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the more regional or the more localized those old newspaper reports, especially prior to people wanting to fake this kind of stuff, are really interesting. Out of everything you've looked into, is there anyone you would say is like most credible or more credible?
As far as the creatures,
Yeah, just as far as like what you found, you know, local evidence that was collected, or just anything in research that's, you know, like a Mothman is as horrifying as some of the stories come out for that. Like the evidence is kind of more specific to like West Virginia or something like that.
right? You know, I think that uh, the Bigfoot seems the most possible to exist. It has the most physical evidence with the footprints, some unknown hair, as well as obviously thousands and thousands of sightings, many of them reported by people who, these aren't crazy hillbillies. These are people who have military backgrounds, biologists, you know, everyday people. And many of those have, I've interviewed those types of people, and, I just can't explain what they saw. They saw something and they saw something they couldn't explain. Um, there's various Bigfoot cases. Obviously, the Boggy Creek case, I've looked into it so much that I can just sort of go, well, all these people aren't making this up. And there's a few of those people that had really ironclad sort of sightings where it was like, well, they're not mistaking this and they're not making this up. There's been other cases where, say, in Georgia, there's an area called Elkins Creek where a deputy sheriff cast a pretty darn good print out of there. That's more like Georgia Bigfoot, but that's a really good cast. When you start getting into things like river monsters or lake monsters and stuff, I mean, there's less sort of the physical evidence. You're just kind of going by anecdotal stories. Something like the Lizard Man, it's going down this, that gets into just what in the world could this be, because the biology of something that's reptilian yet stands upright like a man that's 7 feet tall. You can almost try to explain Bigfoot and convince your uncle that it's probably real, but when you start telling him Lizard Man,
right, yeah,
from the Black Lagoon,
yeah, that's more of a blooper reel special or
it
something.
starts getting harder. Now, that doesn't mean the story is not just as engaging and cool and creepy, because that's I love the story and the phenomenon of it. And when you get into stuff like Mothman, now you play in UFO sightings and Men in Black, and what evidence, there's no footprints of Mothman. those just become harder and harder to rationalize in simple terms. Not that they don't exist, just that those are harder. So, for me, Bigfoot and the various regional versions of it are at the top of the list. And then there's some, other cryptids descending down the list.
What I loved about the Boggy Creek Casebook book is I'm big into research. I love note taking. I love just digging deep into old interviews and stuff. And Josh brought up a good point earlier where it's kind of like the idea that you do new research on old cases. And I think that's something really unique that you do, because you go back and interview these people again, or you go back and research where they saw this and take pictures. And for you, how exciting is it for you when you go back and talk to these people? Does this help invigorate kind of your passion for this? Or are you just trying to maybe just figure out what exactly these people all saw?
Well, I'm excited by it because if it's something that was documented in the newspapers, and Josh talked about this a little bit and said that was kind of before, everybody's got a Facebook Bigfoot group now, and, everybody wants to have an experience. Back then, people, they didn't really want to tell anybody they had seen a giant ape in the woods. People think they're crazy. It just not as accepted as now when you've seen 10 seasons of Finding Bigfoot and you're like, well, look, those people are just like me. They don't seem crazy,
Yeah.
So I think those old cases say something in that, obviously there's a history of this going on, and those cases, sometimes all the dots were never connected. They'd be run some in the newspaper, and then nobody really, like a Bigfoot researcher or a cryptid researcher, didn't interview them. It was just journalists. So if I can go back, especially if I can find the people, or maybe the son of the woman who saw it, and get the full story, and then all of a sudden connect it to not only the other sightings that were reported in the news, but some others that never were. And there's like, oh, wow, you put this together, you go, there's something to this. All these people saw this. And I just love kind of that vintage feel. Kind of goes with how I like the regional cases, just that kind of 1970s monster thing,
Yeah. The classics right behind you.
Yeah, right, like that.
Yeah, so I'll go into, I mean, we're getting into the best season of the year for me, the Halloween season, obviously. And I was creeping on your Instagram here, and you kind of started talking about some of the werewolf legends and lore stuff you've done separately. What do you kind of give to that as far as relevancy, like lycanthropy? It's historical, goes back to Europe, with foundations in Roman mythology. Do you think that it's something that's somewhat credible, or is it more important to folklore than it has been to science? Is it kind of like a warning versus something more credible?
Yeah, I mean, the whole werewolf thing, I mean, there's kind of two aspects to that. The traditions of werewolves, and that dates back to all these cultures previously of sort of a shape-shifting or a human that becomes a wolf. And then you have the sort of cryptozoology cryptid version, which is Dogman, which doesn't really propose that creature was once a human. It's just this bipedal wolf or something, this incredibly large wolf. So, obviously I put more credence in a Dogman than I do werewolves. I love all that. I love the movies, and the Wolfman's one of my favorite films. And I think the archetype of the werewolf often kind of gets thrown in when people see a Dogman, but we got to separate the two from supernatural versus an aberration or sort of an animal that's, like Hogzilla or whatever. There's this
Right.
Wolfzilla.
Yeah.
Some people don't even say it walks upright. It's just these giant wolves or just weird stuff. And Dogman there's a lot of sightings now. It's kind of become in vogue to see a Dogman. I mean, 10 years ago, I'd get some of those reports, and there's a history of it that I've studied, and cases, same thing as like I've looked at with Boggy Creek and others. But now it's like dogman groups and dogman investigation societies. So everybody's kind of focused in on that. But I think there's some credible sightings, and I've interviewed some people that are like, it looked like a werewolf. I don't know how to, what else to tell you, you know?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, you did. Sorry, I was gonna say you did some narration, and one of my favorites was the Bray Road Beast. I loved I've watched that probably 15 times on TV.
Cool.
But I mean, that's a very convincing case to me, because that has a lot of support from what the local community, and it seems like it was well known locally well before, you know, it kind of got outside of there. So, do you have any thoughts on that case being a little more credible than some of the other stuff we've heard?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bray Road case near Elkhorn, Wisconsin, has some good things to it. First, there's a lot of credible witnesses that saw this, and then you have Linda Godfrey, who was in the right place at the right time to kind of, you know, continually research and interview these people. And Linda is a very well balanced, you know, person. You're not trying to convince you of it or convince you it's not. She's just simply looking into it from a investigative journalist point of view, which is kind of what I do. And the fact that she collected all that and put this stuff, connected the dots, it makes that case very credible. I mean, I literally have no doubt people saw some kind of wolf-like creature that to this day we can't quite explain. And then the popularity, you know, that was sort of the launching point for the Dogman thing, as people began to realize, well, it's not just Bray Road. There's sightings in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and I mean, there's been a ton in the South too.
I don't want to assume that the viewers, a lot of our listeners obviously know who Loch Ness, Bigfoot, like werewolf type stuff, but for a Dogman, what are the characteristics of what you've come across in research, what the Dogman actually looks like?
The general description of a Dogman is a canid, which is like a wolf, sometimes described as a dog or a hyena, just some strange looking dog or wolf that has the ability to stand upright on two legs, that can walk bipedally for a certain distance. Sometimes they're on all fours a little bit and they stand up, or sometimes they're just seen running across the road on two legs. They're usually, you know, they have the long muzzle, the snout, hair, paws are sometimes described as having almost like pseudo hands. And you know, that obviously creates a puzzle, because why would a four-legged, you know, digitigrade animal get up and walk on two legs? But people see it, and so it obviously, it's sort of, you think werewolf. Some people go, I don't know how to describe it other than it looked like a werewolf.
When it comes to yourself as a researcher, what's tougher for you to kind of research? Actual video footage or pictures, or something audio or sonic type footage? Like, how do you kind of, I mean, obviously one or the other is great, but if you could combine both, probably even better. But what's the disparity between, whenever we see a picture of a Bigfoot, like the Patterson case, like you see that, or you see this, the latest one this past week, Josh, where the guy in Idaho caught a picture of a Bigfoot or walking, or the stuff, the videos you hear, of the making noises in the woods, and the pictures, like, how is it that we haven't yet, as a researcher, does that bother you that we've yet to actually capture proper audio or video, something like this?
Yeah, of course, that poses a problem, especially the longer it goes. You know, the Patterson Gimlin film is over 50 years old, and there's very few that have come even close to that. But you know, you can dismiss a lot of those pictures and videos because they're grainy. People like, you have to circle it. It could be a shadow or anything. I'm not saying it's not a Bigfoot, but it's like, you know, it's not that easy to get, like, go try to film a Wolverine or whatever. I mean, they can do it, but if you just if I just walked, like if us three went out there, like, we're not really wildlife biologists, where do we start looking? Wolverines exist, and they're super hard to capture on film. Bigfoot being the same way. So, and of course with the internet, there's so many people trying to laugh this off or hoax it or throw, a bone out there, and Bigfoot researchers jump on it for a while until they realize that it's not credible or it doesn't help us. I get a lot of audio clips, but of course they're just sort of unidentified things. You don't actually see a Bigfoot making the noise. So all you can do is speculate that, well, I don't know what other kind of animal it is. Maybe it's a Bigfoot, but that's not going to prove anything. So I think ultimately Bigfoot they're much more few and far between than people realize. They're much harder to get on camera. It's not that easy. And I mean, people say, well, there's all these game cameras that are out there. Well, there was a study some years ago that proved that alpha male coyotes could sense the cameras and would actively avoid them. And this was a real study. I mean, if a dumb old coyote can sense this and avoid it, perhaps something with more intelligence can sense something in the woods that doesn't belong and will just go around it.
Right.
So that's, we just have to say, well, there's a possibility it exists, and just because we hadn't proved it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, I guess.
Yeah, I've done some reading about, how I didn't know about the wolf study. That's interesting. I'll have to look that up. But about, the infrared light, them being able to detect it in a wavelength, and it's like you said, it's odd to them, so they'll avoid it. Or some other stuff with infrasound, like with some of the audio recordings. It's like, some stuff is not easily discernible because it's like you don't know what that is. But then they've had other recordings where there's like an infrasound layer to it, where they're like there's only certain like apex predators can make that certain sound, and I find those more interesting. But unfortunately, I don't know, the field isn't big enough to really investigate all those. So, but hopefully it gets there.
Yeah, I think it comes down to those amazing animals. People, want to attribute all these supernatural powers to Bigfoot, but man, animals, we're just still learning about communication between dolphins, and look at what octopuses can do. Even something as simple as a chameleon, when we see it changing color, the thing just changed colors. So, there's all these things that, this creature could have at its command, from blending into the environment. I mean, the shading of the fur it's on purpose. It's to camouflage. And if it's trying to hide, or if it has some kind of ultrasound or senses the IR on a camera and all this other stuff, that would be just an extremely hard thing to go into the woods and just get on film.
Now, when you do research, and obviously you do a ton of it, how receptive other groups are, like, say, I know obviously you've worked with the Texas Bigfoot Research Center, in the Boggy Creek case book, and you reference them a lot, and obviously they've been receptive to you looking at their research and stuff. But is there a part of this life you're in where these different groups are very guarded with their information? They want to be the first people to find the stuff, and they don't want someone like you not kind of just digging around in their research? Like, how do you kind of navigate your way through these different groups that may be guarded for the information they have?
I've always tried to play neutral to that and not play into group politics. I mean, I understand that when you're investing a lot of time and you have a group and a camaraderie, if your goal is to prove Bigfoot, then yeah, you might want to be the ones to do it. And so you got to be careful of somebody coming in and just taking all your hard work. I've been lucky enough that most of the groups, like just about any group, I could probably call up and say, hey, can I go out with you? And they would say, okay, because they know me personally. They know I'm not trying to heist their group, steal their stuff. If I am trying to document something, I always provide the source, tell about them or whatever. It helps everybody. And so I belong to every group, but I belong to no group. I just like the subject of Bigfoot. And if somebody else likes it too, then we have a common meeting point, whether they're in a group or they're not in a group.
Mm.
I love that. Yeah, I've always been curious. Like, obviously, you do a lot of those conventions with Ken Gearhart and these other people that are out there in this world. I've always been fascinated by, especially in this genre where it's people always, if the guy, the girl that gets that first real picture or finds this thing, or it's gonna change the world. And so I've always been curious about like the ego and stuff backstage, or those meetings where you guys are kind of like, oh, I wrote this book, but it seems like you're the type of guy that, at the end of the day, let's all help each other, put the time in, put research, work together, and maybe we can help solve some of these cases.
Yeah, I find that among my colleagues, from Ken Gerhard to Dr. Jeff Meldrum and Lauren Coleman and all the guys, in these various Bigfoot groups, in general, no, everybody doesn't say, well, I did this or I did that. They're very willing to share as long as they get to know you and know you're a honest person, I think.
Right.
And so you need to, it's like with anything, I try to prove myself. I don't go in there. I'm just looking, to kind of, if I'm documenting a particular case, they understand I want to get all of it, not just part of this side of it. I need everything. And then I'm giving credit, and nobody really fights among the people that I know. And the ones that end up in the fights and all that usually get on the fringe with not just me or somebody, but the whole group. And it's, there's usually a common denominator with that.
Right.
Yeah. When you've been out there with some of those groups, or even if you've been by yourself, I don't know if you've ever done any solo research, have you run into kind of like any scary moments or anything that kind of made you second guess choosing that particular, creature or lore to follow up on? And if so, has the monster sauce come in handy?
Well, I've only had the monster sauce out for a short period of time, so I've never actually been able to, offer it to a cryptid in exchange for not eating me. But he'd probably just take the monster sauce and put it on me and then eat me.
Delicious.
Anyway, but I mostly go, I don't do a lot of group research. I mean, I more just kind of go, most of it is me and one or two other guys that I kind of roam with, and then maybe just some individuals. So I don't do a lot of go into the woods with big groups or anything. I've done that with a little bit, but there's been some weird stuff that's happened. I'm pretty fearless. I grew up hunting with my father since I was little. He was a bow hunter, and we were always out somewhere. And back in those days, we had no GPS, no phone. He didn't believe in compasses or anything. I mean, I don't know how we didn't just get lost in the woods forever. And but we were, several years ago, myself and my late friend Tom Shirley, who I did a lot of research in the Boggy Creek area, we were up there, and we would take the canoe and put it into the bayou. It's an area called Mercer Bayou, which is, it looks like a primordial swamp, the cypress trees and the Spanish moss, and there's stuff slithering and crawling all through there. And there's a lot of alligators, and we would put the canoe in and paddle up at night, because we were literally the only people out there, and it kind of isolated us, and we could listen and look around. It's just cool. It was about midnight or thereafter, and we were paddling. We hear this howl come up out of the woods over there, and there's a lot of ambient noise. There's frogs and insects, and the paddle and stuff. So I stopped. I'm like, was that like the weirdest coyote you ever heard? And he's like, I don't think that was a coyote. So luckily the thing did it again about a minute later. And then we're just like, whoa, dude, it sounds like this howling, growling, deep thing to a howl. And then I'm like, well, that's, I've heard millions of coyotes. That's not a coyote. It doesn't sound like a bird. It sounds big. Well, then it did it again. And so now he's trying to record it, and we're trying not to make too much noise in the boat. And it was really spooky, because then you're like, oh crap, what are we doing out here in the woods? I mean, we're just like, no one really knows where we're at. We're out here at midnight in a swamp. there's an alligator, there's something howling. And so we wait and it doesn't do it again. So we ended up, well, finally we just turned around and paddled all the way back to where our camp was. We're paddling. I mean, it makes some amount of noise. And we get back and pull that canoe out where there's a hill. That's where we had our tent, because down that bayou, you want to camp a little high. I mean, there's literally alligators. And we just got back up to the tent. I mean, it's a very small hill. And all of a sudden, this howl thing comes from right across the bayou channel where we just got out. And of course, it caught us off guard again. And I'm like, dude, it's the same thing. And so he's grabbing the audio thing. I had a flashlight right there, and I just kind of ran down the hill, and I was trying to shine it over there, to see if I could see whatever it was, because I thought, what the hell, it's just my chance, and whatever it was ran off and then called again about 50 yards away within seconds, and did this howl thing. And then went further and howled again. And it was super spooky. And then you're, the adrenaline's pumping, and then you're just kind of like, did that thing somehow follow us down the bayou? And I mean, how did it get right across from our camp? We can just presume that it followed us down there and howled at us, and then just, probably when I made noise, it ran off. But that was pretty spooky, and leads you to question your choice in careers.
Oh man. And did you guys stay the night, or did you you get out of there?
No, we stayed. I mean, it's no problem. I mean, my friend Tom, this guy was the deal. He did he was a trapper in Mississippi for a while, and swamps, nothing. He was fearless too, and I'm fairly fearless, but yeah, we're too manly to admit we're going to run away.
Man,
we're stuck. And those are the type of things. There've been other things. I was out in Florida where I did another thing where I kind of chased something through the woods, and I got kind of scared then, because I got way off down in there. I left this girl I was with, Cindy, and ran off down in there, and I swear it was a skunk ape, but again, I couldn't quite get up on it. It just run ahead a little bit, and I couldn't see it in the brush. And then I thought, well, dude, if I keep going, I'm going to be lost. And then I don't even know what I'm chasing here. So it gets scary.
I love that when this first started, you told us that you grew up as this love of movie monsters and TV shows and all this stuff. But for you to be on Joe Bob Briggs TV show, or have Ghoultown write a song for Elvira, like that for you has got to be something super awesome, where it's like, man, you were not only you following your dreams, your passions, but those people that kind of inspired you, whether it was the movies and the TV shows, here you are hand in hand with them. So can you kind of talk to us about that? Because I find that Joe Bob Briggs and Elvira for me are like the top when it comes to this genre.
Yeah, I've somehow had this odd life or odd way of ending up working with people that I was once a fan of and never even thought that would even be possible. Like Joe Bob and stuff, and Elvira approaching Ghoultown. Ghoultown played at a horror convention, and she was there, and she approached us. Our manager loved the band, and she approached us and said, well, maybe you could write a song. Like, yeah, I could do that, no problem. I'm basically a fan. I can write about you. And so we did that, and they liked the song so much, we ended up flying to Hollywood and shooting a video for it, because we had a mutual friend that we had worked with, who she was a fan of his books, and he was getting into directing, and I knew him. So he directed it and made the video. But yeah, it's very surreal to when you're sitting there going, how am I in Elvira's car? I was even weirder than that. Sometime after they played her first movie, Mistress of the Dark, at the Alamo Theater in Austin, and she invited me to come watch it with her. So I'm in a balcony sitting next to her watching a movie about her. And then Joe Bob Briggs. All kinds of other weird stuff where, like, my favorite band is the Misfits.
Yep.
Ghoultown was once playing in this double level venue where they had bands upstairs and downstairs, and we were headlining downstairs, and they hadn't played yet. They're playing upstairs, and I'm singing or whatever, and somebody's pointing over there, and I'm like, I look over there, and Jerry Only, the bassist for the Misfits, is on stage because we're doing a cover of Ghost Riders in the Sky. He's over there singing, and I'm like, what the hell? I just go, well, this is normal. And we went ahead and played, and he was just an instant fan of the band. And it's like, the Misfits are my favorite band. Then I ended up getting to know all those guys, and then Joe Bob being on his show. That was my favorite show appearance ever. Just being there with Joe Bob and watching him in action and talking about the legend of Boggy Creek. That was just so cool.
Growing up, we had Joe Bob Briggs every night. We'd watch The Burbs or Critters or Mask of Overdrive, wherever the stuff was. And so he was part of my childhood growing up. But as I got older, it's cool to see Shudder TV do stuff, obviously, what you did with Joe Bob. But do you find that as the years go by, that who's going to be the next Elvira? Who's going to be the next Joe Bob Briggs that kind of fuels people's passions for, sure, the movies, entertainment, but the real type stuff like Boggy Creek and stuff like that?
Yeah, I have thought about that. Who are those up and coming? And let me say that they are of a professional level that is not average. I saw Joe Bob, and now he writes the show and he's doing some of it, but a lot of that when he kind of says back to the movie, and then he just starts talking. That's not scripted. None of that. He's just going off. And that dude is the smartest, and he knows everything. I'm just sitting there in awe, just like, whoa. And Elvira as well. She just, in the video, just do this, do that. She's just of a level. And to try to figure out who would fit in there and champion those kind of cheesy movies is hard to say. I mean, I'd volunteer for it, but they're still the kings of it. So.
Right.
Yeah. I almost feel like that genre was kind of like, a drop in the hat of the 70s to 80s, that monster movie classic evolution, and then it kind of fell away for a bit, and it's coming back now as kind of like cult classics that if you and I were into it, then so too our kids are going to be into it because we're going to make them watch that. But I feel like maybe the medium's changed to there isn't going to be that hosted night movie watching anymore. Instead, the new version is going to be like a YouTube channel or a podcast like this or something where it's people who grew up on that and they want to talk about that because the golden age of it has come, and in a lot of ways it's still persistent, but newer stuff coming out with that classic feel, it's hard to find. I don't know, I have hopes, but not that podcast and YouTube is a bad way to get the word out. I think it points people back to those classics, but I don't know, it's definitely going to take a shift here in the next couple of years.
I try not to think, oh, I'm getting old, because I keep going back to the classics, but actually I was doing the classics when I was a kid already. I mean, I love Hammer movies. Yep. And the original Universal Monsters, all the 50s and 60s monster movies, and that 70s sort of thing that Rob Zombie really loves, obviously. But I think now it's like you don't have those movies, and you don't have those opportunities for those icons to have a nationally broadcast TV show. Now it's just spread across everything. You've got a bunch of YouTube guys, and you've got a bunch of different types of horror genres. It's just distributed now instead of focused like it was.
To that point, when it comes to research and people, who's the next Lyle Blackburn? Like, are you worried that you're going to do all this research, and as you get older, you can't do the research, but who's in your wings? And if people want to jump out there into this type of research, do they reach out to someone like you, or how do they get their feet wet to maybe find out, hey, I could be this next researcher, I could be this next person that goes out there?
Well, I mean, I get emails like, hi, I would like to become a cryptozoologist or pursue that career. How would I do that? I'm like, First off, stop, don't do it. Second off, there is no accreditation for it. I don't know how to tell you to do it.
Right.
You just kind of happen. In fact, people call me a cryptozoologist. I never really called myself that or even set out to do it. It's like all I wanted to do is write scary books about people seeing real life monsters. But for lack of a better term, it's like, well, that's cryptozoology. So I just go with it. But, for somebody to do it, I think they just have to find their own way. Like you can do research and you can, publish it on the internet, straight to the internet, write books, do a podcast. There's all those different avenues to where all of a sudden, just like anything, if you do it,
Right.
do it long enough and do it well, you'll rise to the top and people will notice, okay, this guy's really good, or this girl. And there's no real one set way. And I don't know who would follow me or whatever. Or, I don't unless I can't write and walk and use the phone, or, I'd have to be
Right.
pretty darn old before I'd quit doing this. I'm like, I can always write a book, and I can always use my voice, or whatever. So
what's your writing process is it different between writing a song for Ghoultown or writing a chapter in a book? Like where do you kind of get ready? How do you get ready for one or the other?
They're two totally different things, really. Like for writing the books, I assemble all the data first, usually before I start writing anything. Like if I'm going to write about a certain monster or whatever, I'll try to find all the newspaper articles that might have existed. I'll search the internet for any kind of blurbs or people posting about it, collect all that. If I can find some people to interview, I'll call them. I'll go to that town and start poking around, asking around and interview people. And then once I've kind of, map out the chapters the way I want the book to go, then I'll start writing it up. And I'm just sitting there. Okay, first this happened. I usually go chronologically. It's like there was this, and these people saw it, and then this guy, and I talked to this guy, and and then I just roll it in there. So it's just sort of like a more scholarly, journalistic thing.
Right.
With the band, it just sort of like I'll just get in a mood or a vibe to write. Suddenly pick up the guitar, which is sitting over here. There's always the guitars, and I'll just mess around and write something. And usually the songs just kind of come out, usually all at once, like a whole entire album. Then I'll just focus on that for a while. And then I'll put the guitar down, and I may not touch it for 6 months. I'm doing monster stuff. And then all of a sudden it's like, I didn't think I had any more songs, but suddenly, but it's cool because I don't work for any, some of my books are on a publisher, but they don't give me deadlines really or anything. It's just, I just do whatever I want. And when I'm done with it, then it'll come out. And I like that. I don't have any, the songs they'll be done when I think they're done. The book, when I'm satisfied it's done, that's when it's done, by, not trying to follow some boss or something telling me when to do it.
Do you have some research kind of like documentaries or books that kind of fall into that same timeline of maybe you'll do some research on it and it'll kind of get put aside until you can get more material, or until you get a chance to kind of circle back on like more difficult to find leads, and then you'll finish it later, kind of like your song that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's kind of the way it happens. If I kind of have folders of stuff, and if I see something that I think is cool or that might fit into something that I envision for the future, I'll go ahead and pursue it. Grab that newspaper thing or call that witness and go ahead and record the audio. But it might just go over there because I don't really have enough for that right now, and it's not what I'm already working on this book, but I'll file it over there, and then I could come back to it later. It could be 1 year or 5 or 6 years, You know, my Sinister Swamps book took me about 10 years to gather all that stuff.
Wow.
Just little by little in between and just putting it together. But it made a better book, because if I'd have hurried to try to do it, I'd never get all those things into one, find all those things from one area, because it just takes time. And then you see another little thing and follow another thread, you know.
I love how you put together, just launched that hot sauce stuff. So is that, obviously you're a fan of hot sauce, but how did you kind of put that together where this could be something cool that not only pushes your brand, I guess, but more push the passion out there that there's people out here looking for this stuff?
Yeah, that I often have these kooky ideas where I suddenly, you know, will decide to do it. And the hot sauce it kind of was a combination of a guy did a kind of a black and white icon of me with a hat, and it looked cool, like a not like a cartoon, but an icon that you can see it's me. I had that. I was like, what can I do with that, you know? And then Elvira put out a hot sauce, or somebody basically licensed her image. I saw that and had a little kind of icon of, I was like, you know, I could do a hot sauce. People don't know, but I'm like a gourmet chef, and I cook, and I'm self-taught. Before I was on Cryptid shows, I was actually going to launch a cooking show.
That's awesome.
A rock and roll cooking show. I'm not kidding you. This was kind of before that guy Guy Fieri won that contest on the Food Network, and he kind of became a sort of the rock and roll guy. This was before that. And I was going to have my musician friends come to my house and play like acoustically or something. That was part of the show. Anyway, so the hot sauce, I just thought, well, I've got an icon. I've got ideas for hot sauces and this and that, and maybe I could somehow figure out how to do it. And so I just greenlit the project and did it. Just, I don't know, no real intentions of like becoming a hot sauce mogul or anything, but I know that it's cool and everybody eats hot sauce. If I put that on my table when I'm doing a book signing, people are like, oh, this is cool, you know. And I've been autographing bottles at events.
Yeah, no, it looks good. I'll have to get some for sure.
You mentioned, Josh and I both are wondering, the history of your hat. It does look something that's so iconic. Like, is this a hat that, like, what's the history of this hat?
That's another thing. People ask me, where'd you get your hat? Where can I get one? I'm like, well, the hat actually came from Mexico. And this was when I started Ghoultown. I started the idea of Ghoultown around 1997 and 98. And the band pretty much got launched in 99. And I had an idea of this dark Western kind of thing. And I had another hat that was not quite this. Like, man, I need a hat. And at the time, I would go to Mexico frequently. I just fly down there and just wing it and go stay at these little places, Puerto Vallarta and other places, and just hang out. And so, like, well, they have a lot of leather goods down there. You know, I'm like, I could probably find something really cool. So one time I was down there, you know, there it was, and also a vest that I wore a lot on stage. And you know, it's just some handmade thing. And I've been searching for a backup for 20 years. Like, I'll go in, I'll see, even in El Paso, they had some similar hats. They just didn't look right on me. I don't know what it is or what. So now the hat is like,
yeah,
it's insured. I never let it out of my sight, ever.
Awesome.
Never. I don't put it on the bags that fly on the plane. It's on me. And, you know, it's like in my will that this must be preserved.
So if you and Ken Gerhart are in the same room at the same time, which one has to lose the hat?
Well, we don't, because you know why? It's because none of us can actually prove how young we were when we first wore a hat. Because I have a picture when I was 3 and I'm like this attitude, and I'm wearing it's like a brown hat at the time, but it's the hat. I'm like, dude, I was wearing hats at 3. He whips out a picture. He goes, I think I was 3 in this, and he's wearing a hat.
It's a hat off.
It's a hat off. So it's a draw. So we just.
I've actually seen Ken though without his hat off and a lot of stuff like press and stuff. But it's like such a iconic look. And I think it definitely is part of your legacy for sure.
Yeah, and I there for a while, like when I was Bigfoot, I mean, it's like I don't wear this in the woods or whatever. I don't want to lose it, but I would wear a baseball hat and stuff. And then after a while, it doesn't matter what I was doing, or hat or no hat, people go, "Where's your hat?" So I'm like, I'm just wearing the hat. And of course, in Ghoultown, I wore it all the time because it was like the stage look. So I already wore it every time there, and then. Now it's like, even for a radio interview, I just wear the hat. Now, Ken, he's been on a few shows that convinced him or made him take the hat off. He doesn't like to do it either because that's his trademark. But I will walk off the set, and they do it every time. They want to get me on the show, and then they get to the set and they go, "We want to go over something first." I just go, "No." Well, we haven't asked the question. I said, "No." "Can we lose the hat?" I go, "No, that's like why you hire me." And then I tell them, "I'll leave or you shoot with a hat." And then of course they do. It's true.
I love it. It's a point of contention.
Every time they do it. I mean, my agent will put it in the contract. He is, will appear in the hat. That's his trademark. And they'll kind of change it. We will most probably let him wear. It's like, I'm wearing it, or I won't. You won't learn anything.
Oh yeah. If there was a challenge coin made, it would be you with the hat. You can't let go of it.
Yeah, especially at this point, it's just the thing. It's like people, some people will laugh about that, and then it's a joke. Like, if I'm a cryptozoologist, I gotta have a hat. But it's just a thing.
No, I believe me, the amount of research you've done and the time and stuff you put towards this field, I think you wear whatever you want, whenever you want. So that's pretty cool. Now, before we let you go and stuff, Lyle, this has been great. Where can people buy your hot sauce, social media, stuff like that? Tell us about where we can kind of reach out to you and find out what you're doing.
And what you got coming up, if you have anything.
Right. LyleBlackburn.com is the place to go for all the information. I've got a shop link on there where you can buy stuff directly from me, books, t-shirts, and the hot sauce. It's really kind of the only place you can get it. It's carried in some retail locations, but there's a link on there. It'll tell you where that is if you happen to be out and about it. In the usually Bigfoot museums and places like that, I'll carry it. And you can also get my books on Amazon, of course, and Ghoultown music is available wherever finer music is sold: iTunes, Bandcamp, Amazon, everywhere, YouTube, stream it. And there's links at LyleBlackburn.com to all that stuff. So coming up, I've got some event appearances. It seems like the fall kind of got rolling with having more things around the country, although the Mothman Festival just got canceled. I was supposed to speak at that, but COVID's up and down. So there's a list of things. So I'm about ready to get out and do some events. And then I've been working on a book project slowly but surely, kind of as I've been going. I put 2 books out last year. So I took a bit of a breather for a while, did the monster sauce thing, like, woohoo. And now I'm kind of back to, now it's become like, which book do I write? Because I get out this list and it's like 15 titles long. Which one do I write? So,
yeah.
But always working on a book. So
love it. Well, again, thank you, Josh, for wanting to be out here, and thank you, Lyle, for coming on Spirit Talk. And this was a blast, and we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely, enjoyed it.
Yeah,
awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you all for checking out this week's episode. Once again, I'm John. If you like what you heard and saw today, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and check out our brand new merch store with hats, coffee mugs, t-shirts, other cool stuff coming down the pipeline. Again, thank you all for support. Be safe and see you next week.